Hey everyone, Tony Majewski with AODocs. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking some time to sit with us today. I want to thank DSF for number one, giving us the opportunity to participate, and number two, for making sure that the conference still went on, albeit virtually, which leads us into our session, which is 20 things for 2020. Some reflections, some things that we've seen, market trends, as well as some things to look forward to in 2021, some things that we have on our radar, right? Uh, Going straight to the point, getting to number one and getting it out of the way, really. COVID has been absolutely brutal. It sucks. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. It's put us all in extremely difficult situations. It's been challenging. We as individuals have had to make incredible sacrifices as well as the organizations that we work for, right? It's completely reshaped how we're getting work done, how we're driving outcomes, how we're engaging with our colleagues, our customers. Um, and, it's something that a lot of companies weren't prepared for, right? I don't think you really can prepare for something like this. It's something that I obviously haven't experienced in my lifetime. Uh, so, it does create this significant learning experience. And I think that's one of the silver linings that we can try to take away from something like this. It's a very unique situation. It's created problems, but it's created this opportunity for us to, reflect on, how were we able to work with this and handle it and, show that we can come in and change and adapt, right? What we didn't do so well and how we can learn from those things as we move forward and develop strategies to make sure that we are prepared for these types of things moving forward, right? So, we talk about the changes that we've had to deal with. We can lead that into our second point, right? These changes have created a climate from a technology perspective that has introduced a boost to the ECM and I would say more importantly, the CSP, the content services platform market. Probably the biggest boost that we've potentially ever seen, right? The main reason, and if you look at content services platforms versus the more legacy and traditional ECM, they're supposed to be cloud native. They're supposed to be API first. If your business is leveraging those concepts, you probably didn't see your business continuity interrupted, right? So it's an area where I think people are looking to our platforms as it relates to file, data, document, process, governance management, especially with cloud principles, and seeing it as an opportunity, seeing it as a tool that they do need, right? I personally categorize it as a line of business system because it is so integral to organizational success and health, right? On the flip side, there are organizations that are still leveraging a lot of legacy concepts, right? And in doing that, you may have dealt with continuity issues, right? You may have, come away from it thinking, we had been thinking about modernization for a long time. We've been thinking about updating our approach to ECM for a long time, but we really never got around to doing it, right? So there's there's now this renewed emphasis for those types of organizations. I think there's also an emphasis on what those modern players are from a CSP perspective and really bringing a lot of attention to the market, right? At the end of the day, it shows that these solutions can have a very positive impact, especially with a very intentional mindset on modern, agile content service platforms, right? So, we think about the different markets, we think about the different industries that have been impacted. And for the third point, want to talk a little bit about, the traditional industries and how the economy has changed, right? Obviously, organizations have been significantly impacted negatively because of COVID, right? If we look at one of the biggest industries that was impacted by all this is retail, brick and mortar retail. People aren't obviously out shopping during lockdown. So we saw a lot of large retail organizations get hit extremely hard. And, they were furloughing, there were cuts, there were frozen budgets, initiatives stalled until we get through this, until we get a better idea of what this looks like, right? The an example of an industry that saw acceleration was healthcare, right? A lot of organizations on the healthcare side were looking for modern and creative ways to engage with patients to improve clinician experience in a high stress time, right? So you look at telehealth, you look at the software providers that can address telehealth, right? And then the same, I think, could be true for life sciences, where any level of acceleration in getting a vaccine, for instance, to market is significantly valuable, right? For the well being of the world, but obviously the financial health of a life sciences company. So, we do see these shifts in how our economies are impacted by COVID. It's not bad for everyone. It's not positive for everyone. It's going to vary industry to industry, um, but it is different from a buying perspective, obviously, to understand how your organization was impacted, but from the vendor perspective as well, making sure that your messaging resonates, making sure that the solutions that you're putting together are able to impact positive outcomes for business, right? So those things are always really important as it relates to different industry changes and really the effect of COVID that's had on organizations. The fourth point that I want to get to is thinking about kind of the positive technology impact on a business, the positive technology experience. So I just mentioned telehealth previously, right? And how we can align that to digital transformation. It's a buzzword that's been a constant for years now, right? How are we going to impact change? What are those solutions that are going to deliver those outcomes, right? At its core, it's still relevant, but I think it saw a pivot with everyone working from home, right? That became the focus. Digital transformation to me is a programmatic strategy that needs to be put in place. Work from home was like, oh, well, okay, everyone is going to be at their desk. Not everyone has a home office. How do we maintain business? How do we maintain outcomes? How do we maintain our customer experience, right? So organizations were way less strategic about it, and it was all about agility and continuity, right? How are we going to keep our people connected? How are we going to mitigate risk? Because there's nothing more shadow IT than a work from home environment, right? So we need to be very intentional about understanding how we're going to deal with these things. It also put a lot of those companies that weren't intentional about digital transformation in a very difficult place, right? And how they were going to deal with it moving forward. And I think it put them in a position to where they are going to be very thorough in developing their strategy coming out of this, right? So there's one really important topic that we've highlighted here, and it's our fifth point. And in addition to adopting new transformative technologies, there is this strong focus uh, of the impact of work from home on your employee base, right? Uh, what is the mental health of your colleagues and your employees? So a lot of organizations are needing to show a strong sense of employee empathy, right? Um, we think about our employees tied to organizational performance, and you have to understand the impact of all of these changes on how your employees are working day to day. You know, if they're uncomfortable, there's a lot of external stressors that we're dealing with right now, right? Do you know someone who is sick? Do you have a family member who is sick, right? So there's a lot of distractions. You might have, kids learning from home right now as well. You might have decided to kick off a home improvement project that's creating tons of noise. So you you have to keep that in mind, and how an employee that may not be 100% in a positive mindset, how that impacts their productivity, right? If it negatively impacts their productivity, it's going to negatively impact outcomes, customer experience, customer interactions, all of those pieces, right? So there's a mental aspect of this. We've seen a lot of really good examples of companies being very proactive in engaging with their workforce, giving out mental health holidays over the summer, saw that with a handful of companies. Um, but there's also a big technology component to this, right? From an engagement perspective, you saw organizations, leaning into Google Meet or Zoom to create opportunities for as face-to-face as you can get with engagement. But there's the aspect of the tools that people use day to day, right? And how that impacts work. If you're in a VPN situation and you're using old, thick client solutions that don't work well, you're probably not going to be in a positive headspace every day at work, right? Unnecessarily difficult. And again, it's going to have a negative impact on work. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we contributing to that total employee health, right? What are we doing as an employer from a culture perspective? But also, are we giving them the right technology that's going to make their lives easier as we work day to day, right? So something to keep in mind. And again, I will always stress that empathy of being very proactive and making sure that your people are okay, right? So we just talked about choosing the right tools for your people to make sure it's a positive working experience. And so our sixth point, we want to talk about how people have traditionally evaluated software, right? You're going from an RFP model to what we can call, GSD, get stuff done, right? IT groups are scrambling to react. CIO initiatives, work from home, new ways of dealing with customers. You have to make something happen, right? So you need to get something done quickly. You need something that can be implemented quickly. You need technology that delivers agility to the business and can be iterated upon quickly, right? Something that you're not going to have to scrap every time a requirement changes, 2, 3 months down the road. So, focusing on those points is going to be pretty key for an organization. Uh, I think about the vendors that have been able to support this as well. Zoom, I think, was on the forefront of this, right, when the COVID crisis hit, and making sure that Zoom was available, right? Google Workspace, so formerly G Suite. Google was very proactive in making the platform available for people, right? So you could collaborate, so you could engage, right? So you love seeing that kind of stuff from vendors. You love to see that it was accessible, that they were able to access it at no cost in some cases. And they were able to help those organizations make things happen, right? So you like to see that. I also think the evaluation and the engagement is different. I think we've seen this trend where buyers are more educated and informed on software and technology than they ever have been before. There's a ton of information out there. I personally like to see vendors that make information freely available as much as possible, right? Not behind paywalls, not behind things or form walls, not a paywall. So you like to see that. You also like to see people leaning into things like G2 Crowd rather than having to rely on the short list a vendor gives you, right? Because those references are almost always going to be super positive, right? So you're getting a lot of self-research. I also think that puts you in a position to make a decision a lot faster in this scenario of just getting stuff done. Moving on to point 7, a key area where we saw an opportunity to engage with vendors traditionally. Physical conferences, they're gone, right? We're doing this remotely right now. My last conference was in Dallas at AIM in March, flew home on Wednesday, and by Friday afternoon, the directive was out, working from home, foreseeable future. So what's this going to look like, right? I think we've seen a lot of positives out of virtual events, right? Until we're safe to get back to normal. Um, it's different, yes, but again, I think it gives us a unique way to broaden the scope of attendees and vendors that get to participate in things like this, right? It's a lot of time and resources to attend a conference, which I personally spend a lot of time at them. I like them. Um, but it's also very time and resource heavy for vendors to participate. And if you're a newer vendor that's offering a cutting edge technology or a new idea, you may not have a lot of opportunities like this, right? So going virtual, it broadens the landscape for a potential buyer or evaluator to come in and see something that they potentially wouldn't have seen at an in-person conference. So I think that's a silver lining that we see from this is, again, a little bit more diversification of who's involved in a virtual conference versus an in-person. Um, as we come out of this, right, I do think we will go back to physical conferences when it's safe, when the time is right. It will be different. There will be a renewed sense of self-care and health, staying healthy when we get back to physical conferences. Um, but I also think there will be a significant readiness for us to get back to normal and go see people, attend an event, go to a networking session afterwards, sit at a round table and contribute, have a conversation, go play golf with your colleagues you haven't seen in a while, right? I do think there will be this significant pull back to this sense of normalcy that we're missing right now. But again, obviously, when it's safe to do so, right? Um, but until we get that all clear moment, right? Moving on to point 8, working from home is now a business tool, right? It's not an excuse for an easy day. For a lot of organizations, there was always this risk of, do I want to let my employees go home, right? Are they going to work? Are they going to slack off? Are they going to play with their dog all day? Are they going to go golf, right? Well, not much of a choice now, right? It became a necessity. I think a lot of organizations found their employees can be extremely productive, in some cases, potentially more productive because they can just get their head down and power through work, depending on what their role and their responsibilities are, right? Are there distractions? Yes, 100%. You're working from home. If you've got kids, you have that. You have the education aspect of it. If you've got a home improvement project started, that's obviously going to have an impact as well. Loud noises, things like that. Uh, but it's a business tool now. It's absolutely a business tool. And organizations that embrace it and they embrace the importance of change management around supporting work from home and obviously the software and processes and governance that comes with it, they're going to be effective coming out of this because it is an unbelievable recruitment tool, I think, moving forward, that work from home is a viable option for a company, right? So 100% think it's a business tool. Absolutely think there's always going to be distractions with it, but ask yourself, do we have the right tools? Do we have the right support network? Do we have the right onboarding for this? Right? Those are key things to be asking yourselves. Um, as we move to work from home for our 9th point, we can see an emphasis on the digital mailroom, the digital AP processing, right? If you think about all the physical processing that still takes place today in 2020, the vendors that are still sending out physical invoices, purchase orders, etc., that are extremely slow to adopt your pleads for adopting your digitization methodologies. This is kind of forcing the issue, right? Fingers crossed. But if you're an AP and you've been just absolutely hounding your last remaining vendors to use the portal, this kind of forces the issue, right? And I think this is a situation where once you do it, once you commit to it, there really is no going back, right? So I think that this could be a potential pretty significant silver lining for those business groups uh, to really go all in on those digitization efforts, right? I do think there's also an opportunity here for what you could even consider something like AP processing at the edge, right? Directly at the vendor side, which could be super interesting. So as we talk about the AP use case, it pivots really nicely to our 10th point, right? We talk about the concept of processing, saving time. You cannot ignore the continued growth of RPA, right? It's something that is getting a lot of attention. It's been around for a while, but I think it's making significant, larger strides forward, right? Robotic process automation. It's number one. It's important in terms of making work a lot easier, right? Getting data from a newly structured file, a line of business system, moving it over to another line of business system. It's critical. And I think we're seeing a lot of success with it, right? It's very easy to implement to a certain degree. And it gives a lot of iterative success, right? I also think that there's some RPA providers out there that are really introducing a lot of intelligence into their solutions, and that's going to be one of the bigger game changers that it's not going away anytime soon because they're continuing to kind of push the envelope on what the solution can do, what it can integrate with, how much easier it's getting to implement and support. All major keys that really show that it's going to be in the spotlight for a long time to come. Staying on the topic of automation for our 11th point, one thing that I personally am extremely excited about, and certain people may not be as excited about, is the fact that AI ML capture is starting to outpace traditional OCR. So I think from an organizational perspective, the democratization of AI for structuring content, it's going to be one of the biggest efficiency gains at any level of business that we've seen in the last 10 to 20 years from a technology perspective. I have seen what I would consider mind-blowing numbers as it relates to the success of AI ML based capture. Um, you look to the foundational building blocks that are being developed on this topic. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all developing these cloud native, scalable, continuously improving AI ML solutions that are specifically tied to structuring unstructured content, right? And extracting a much more diverse data set due to this new technology, right? It's also putting software companies in a position to leverage those pre-existing building blocks to create very consumable software, for targeted use cases. Something that is available to a 15-person company that doesn't have a bench of AI ML talent on their staff, right? And the same is going to be true for a 150,000 person organization. So it's very exciting. It's going to be an absolute game changer. And I do think that this is going to um, introduce some potential changes to the market for the companies that have been in traditional OCR for a long time, right? Are they developing their own IP around this? Are they looking to introduce more features and functions to separate themselves, right? Workflow. Are they potentially looking at becoming a more robust content services platform instead of just a capture solution, right? What other solutions are they looking to integrate with? So very interesting to see where this goes. I'm super curious. I'm very excited about it because I do think it's going to be extremely valuable for the business to be able to leverage this kind of technology without the significant, expertise that had traditionally been required. So if we're talking about market hype, things that are exciting, things that have been kind of on the forefront with our 12th point, it's impossible to ignore low code and no code solutions, right? Are these things still important moving into 2021? Right? Do organizations have a strong development competency center inside the organization to develop and support low code solutions, right? How do they integrate with document and file centric solutions? Are you unintentionally creating more silos, which of course we want to eliminate, right? For the vendors, how are we educating people on the difference between low code and no code? I've talked to plenty of people that have said, we want to prioritize citizen admins, so we need low code. It's like, well, if they don't know how to code, then they probably need a low code solution because low code does not mean no code. It's still important. It's here to stay. I think that there's going to be a renewed emphasis on no code, right? You saw Google acquire AppSheet on this topic, but you do need to understand the associated risks of business users being responsible for developing their own applications, right? Do you have unnecessary sprawl? Does it introduce risk versus how the enterprise wants them to work? And specifically going back, how it's going to tie to those file and document centric processes, right? There's always going to be a lot of factors tied to that, and you don't want to create an environment where you just have attachments everywhere in these solutions. So moving on to point 13, 2020 has been a big year for M&A, right? Is Highland turning into OpenText? Our friends at OpenText have traditionally grown through acquisition, and Highland does something that was maybe seen as something, somewhat of a surprise with their acquisition of Alfresco. Maybe more of a surprise that Alfresco was willing to get acquired, but it's big news for our industry, right? It's exciting to see. So very curious to see what this looks like moving forward for our market specifically, and that brings us to our 14th point, right? market direction. We're seeing the leaders grow. They're cementing themselves as the stalwarts. They're going to be here for the foreseeable future. They're putting an emphasis on locking up their market share and then leveraging their experience to reinforce their value and to expand that market share, right? The visionaries, what are they doing? Are they struggling? Is work from home impacting evaluations? Uh, is it change management of a new solution? Right? Are organizations referring back to the vendors that have been there and done that and trusting them quicker? I absolutely think that's the case, right? I think credibility is a big factor in making a decision quickly, right? Personally, I would have assumed the opposite, right? I would have thought that the visionaries now is to really shine, is the time to shine. It's to show why you're different, why the being cloud native is super beneficial, right? But I do think in this current climate, that trust, that credibility, that reference is a critical piece of the buying decision. I think the leaders have a distinct advantage over the visionaries in that climate, the climate that we're currently in. So moving on to 15 and expanding on this topic a little bit, right? I think Highland strengthening their position with the Alfresco acquisition. Microsoft further advancing themselves as the market leader with their Cortex offering. Very impressed by that. And I believe that they do deliver probably the most full-featured solution with a combination of Microsoft 365, SharePoint, and Microsoft Teams, which we consistently hear is going viral across organizations. I have heard that that is a good thing, and I've also heard that that is a bad thing, depending on who you talk to that is using the solution, right? These leaders and who's going to define leaders, who's going to grow within the industry. I think the intelligence question, the AML, it's going to be a key trend. Which organizations are introducing that intelligence? Is it specialized? Is it broad? I think this is an area where the leaders have a distinct advantage because they have a resource advantage, right? They can develop it themselves or they can go acquire the capabilities. I think that's an area where other organizations may fall back if they don't have a strategy or they don't have the resources to do it. And in that case, they should be thinking partnerships. What other tech companies can advance my capabilities in the short term while I develop the resources or I develop the IP or we talk to another solution about a merger, right? Some organizations that might be falling back a little bit, IBM, OpenText, M-Files come to mind. It's going to be extremely interesting to see how the market adapts, right? It's going to be a very interesting next few years for us. I've always believed that this market, is really kind of craving disruption. It's craving modern, user-friendly tools. The first company that makes content management and content services easy to deploy is going to be a major winner, right? There's also the question of where Google fits into all of this, right? So, a highly collaborative environment and really focusing on their governance principles and their workflow capabilities. And traditionally, they've leaned heavily on their ISV community, right? So we're really curious to see what this all ends up looking like. And if we move on, organizations that are wondering what it looks like, if they haven't been super proactive about it, is moving on to our 16th point, right? Legacy modernization, still very much on the agenda for organizations. I heard something that I thought was absolutely brilliant as far as addressing legacy modernization, the destroy and deploy from Bryson Kaler at Equifax. So this was his approach to modernization at Equifax, specifically with their move to Google Cloud Workspace. I think it's the most effective way to describe it because companies that are doing it the right way, they're not focused on a lift and shift. They want to understand what their business outcomes are, what their outcome goals are, and then understanding what current technology and what current roadmaps are going to best get them to those outcomes, right? Taking your SharePoint 2010 environment and moving it as quickly as possible into your modern solution isn't an effective way to do this, right? You have significant rot. There's so much information and data that doesn't need to get moved. The technology is potentially 10 years old. That means your mindset is 10 years old. That should not be your baseline of how you want to address it moving forward, right? So the onus is on leadership and on IT to understand those outcomes and get it there. Frame it with the understanding of there's new stuff out there that frankly didn't exist last time we reevaluated how we wanted to solve this problem, right? Understanding that, and really outside of governance, throw all that other stuff away, right? Focus on those outcomes, take advantage of that new technology. We've seen specific examples at AODocs to where organizations were able to take hundreds of parallel applications and workflows and consolidate them into one in our solution, right? If they would have taken the lift and shift approach, they would have just moved a ton of overhead in technical debt one to one into the cloud. That's not the way that you want to do that. So, as Bryson said, destroy and deploy, right? Absolutely love that term. And I do think that the big takeaway from 2020 as it relates to COVID is it does spur this more intentional review of what outcomes as an organization that you want to drive and then how you're going to get there, right? Speaking of 10-year-old mindsets, with point number 17, SharePoint 2010 is still here in the year 2020, right? SharePoint 2010 will be able to drive a car in 6 years. I would not be shocked if at some point in 6 years, there are still instances out there that the company hasn't been able to pull out for whatever reason. October 13th, I believe it was a Thursday, was supposed to be the end of life date this year, but it got moved. Obviously, from a marketing perspective, Friday the 13th would have been a little bit better, but we can't control the calendar. So what does that mean if you're a SharePoint 2010 user? You've got until April, I believe, is the updated date. How are you going to do this? You're going to modernize to a newer version of SharePoint, go to SharePoint Online, or you're going to consider Google. Regardless, it's time to evaluate your file, data, governance, workflow, and reporting outcomes. You should destroy and deploy, right? Going back to point number 16. So let's start looking ahead, right? 2021, let's get out of 2020, please. In 2020, we're starting to see our platforms as a service, mainly our collaboration side of things on the docs, the sheets, the slides, the Word, the Excel, the PowerPoint. New APIs are starting to get exposed. We're entering this era of intelligent content creation, right? Taking data points, known data points from the line of business systems, upstream data, downstream data, et cetera, human data entry, and we're able to create rich, dynamic content, right? So, practical example, legal contract generation, pre-approved snippets of text that legal has already blessed. Someone fills out a form, and then boom, you've got a legal contract document automatically generated, approved 100% by legal, ready to go. Same concept could be true for generating a slide deck, an SOW, an info sheet, all leveraging Salesforce data, right? Tons of different applications for this. A way to generate content at scale. And by no means is that taking my job away, right? I'm very proud of the presentations that I build for work, but it's allowing me to get through a lot of manual effort to allow me to focus on high value things, right? The one way that I like to look at it, and this is, I think, universal to a few other points like intelligent capture with AIML, but in this case for content creation, it's extracting that tribal knowledge from your workers and really, programmatically implementing it into your business, right? And allowing those people to go be effective at their job, right? And go do those high value things. So it's something that I'm extremely excited about. I think the opportunities are endless for this concept across, HR, legal, into the life sciences industry, healthcare, really manufacturing. You can find a use case for it anywhere. So very excited about that as we get into 2021. For point 19, it's going to be a massive year for compliance. Compliance is always important, though, right? Especially from a document perspective and a file and a data perspective. But we're borderline going to be picking up the pieces from 2020. We've moved to working from home. People are working their own way. It's never been easier to create content. What risks were introduced to the organization? So we're going to have our hands full from a compliance perspective. There's going to be a renewed sense of interest. I don't necessarily like saying that because it's always been very important, but people are going to be rounding up basically anything that's strayed, that's falling outside the enterprise, figuring out how much of the Wild West was put out there during the work from home window. There's going to be a push for technology to support it. And I think there needs to be an emphasis on understanding that there is technology that exists out there that eliminates the compromise between compliance and what the end user wants to do, what their outcome is as a job, right? There's solutions out there that solve compliance requirements persistently without being intrusive on the end user. And the end user has a benefit for using the software. They go into the software and they see that it helps them get their job done faster. And at the same time, they don't have to be a compliance expert, right? Everyone wins in those scenarios. So understanding that there are solutions that do that, it's a massive win for your compliance program, and it's a massive win for the end users. And then obviously the business benefits as well. And moving on to point number 20. You've heard me talk at you for a while now, so almost done. 2021 will be the year of touchless AI everything. This is going to be all over from a marketing perspective, probably more so than a practical perspective. But a lot of exciting technology is coming out on this front, right? Tied back to what we were talking about earlier with OCR, but this democratization of AI, making it available, making it consumable, making it address really point requirements and use cases. I think in general, it's never been easier to create content. I can go to my URL bar, type docs.new, and I've got a Google Doc ready to go, right? I think we're going to see these types of concepts of AI just being embedded into what we do, right? And so, how can we take this same approach and be prepared to use it? Where can we find the practical use cases for it? Areas where it is high value, areas where it isn't going to become a significant FTE burden, right? And most importantly, separating the vendors that say they can do it and the ones that can actually do it, right? So those are the 20 for 2020. I do have one more bonus one, right? Point number 21. It's the thing I'm most looking forward to in 2021. And it's that it's the year that we recover, right? As an individual, as an organization, as a community, we want to look forward. We want to find all the positives and what we learned, right? And it's that we will be back, right? We will be back in 2021, right? Things will get better. Things will continue to get better. Our work relationships will get back to normal. We'll get to go to conferences again. We can play golf together again. You can tell it's a recurring theme with me. But as my final point, we are looking forward, right? We are going to get back together, and I'm excited about that. I'm very positive about that. I'm positive about all the exciting things that we talked about next year, and I really want to thank you guys for spending some time with us. Want to give a thank you to DSF, and more than happy to discuss any of these points with you. Would love to hear from you in the future. So here's to 2021. Thanks a bunch. Cheers.